A few days ago, Venerable Tarpa gave a talk about how the news, how media affects our minds, and I had a very similar experience this week that I wanted to share a little bit about. So this feeling of being very discouraged and for me, fearful when you read about horrific news. And Venerable Tarpa talked a lot about the importance of remembering good news and the importance of keeping our mind balanced in a positive way. So I wanted to talk a little bit about personal distress, which is where my mind went when I read this article. It was a New York Times article. And I'm just going to read a little bit of it so you get the sense of what this was about. It's called Those Who Serve Ebola Victims Soldier On. The best defense against despair was to keep working. Many times that choice was far from obvious. Josephine Findaselu lost 15 of her nurses to Ebola in rapid succession and thought about quitting herself. She did not. Ms. Sulu, the deputy nurse matron, is a rare survivor who never stopped toiling at the government hospital here, Sierra Leone's biggest death trap for the virus, during the dark months of June and July. Hers is a select club consisting of perhaps 3 women on the original Ebola nursing staff who did not become infected, who watched their colleagues die, and who are still carrying on. She says, there is a need for me to be around. Who's Miss Sula, who is 42, who oversees the Ebola nurses. I'm a senior. If I left, the whole thing would collapse. The other nurses call her Mummy, and she resembles a field marshal in light brown medical scrubs, charging forward, exhorting nurses to return to duty, inspecting food for patients, doing a dance for once infected co-workers who live. Nurse survivors, she calls them enthusiastically. In the campaign against the Ebola virus, which is sweeping across parts of West Africa in an epidemic worse than all previous outbreaks of the disease combined, the front line is stitched together by people like Ms. Sulu, doctors and nurses who give their lives to treat patients who will probably die, janitors who clean up lethal pools of vomit and waste so that beleaguered health centers can stay open, drivers who venture into villages overcome by illnesses to retrieve patients, body handlers charged with the dangerous track of keeping highly infectious corpses from sickening others. Their sacrifices are evident from the statistics alone. At least 129 health workers have died fighting the disease, according to the World Health Organization. But while many workers have fled, leaving already shaky health systems in shambles, many new recruits have signed up willingly, often for little or no pay, and sometimes giving up their homes, communities, and even families in the process. And then another quote from a young fellow called Candy Camara. If I don't volunteer, who can do this work? He's about one of 20 young men doing one of the worst jobs in the campaign, finding and burying corpses across eastern Sierra Leone. When the outbreak started months ago, this 21-year-old fellow went to the health center in his near his city and offered to help. When officials there said they could not pay him, he accepted anyway. There are no other people to do it, so we decided to do it just to help save our country. They call themselves the Burial Boys. So Doctors Without Borders trained them to wear protective equipment and to safely clear out dead bodies potentially infected with Ebola. They travel across backbreaking dirt roads for up to 9 hours a day. In doing their jobs, the Burial Boys have become pariahs. Many have been cast out of their communities because of fear that they will bring the virus home with them. Often their families refuse to let them return. So needless to say, when I read this, there was a lot of reaction. And it was really a good experience to really watch how personal distress rose up in my mind with this particular article. And I saw how my mind immediately went to kind of a blamey sounding mind, focusing on what others were doing wrong. My mind got very tight and narrow, and filled with judgment and fear, and very much focused on my own distress. And I think, I was thinking about, why that so quickly comes up, and I think two things. One is the lack of understanding of impermanence. I think that's one. And then also, I think it gives me a little picture into the level of my renunciation, thinking that things should be different or better here. This is what is experienced here in this existence a lot, in many places, in many times. And not wanting to fully embrace that, then the mind pushes away and looks outward for the fault, and which is not so helpful, of course. Then immediately my own peace of mind is totally destroyed. And so what I did when I noticed all that is I really forced myself to focus on the words of these people helping in the middle of this chaos. There is a need for me to be around. If I left, the whole thing would collapse. If I don't volunteer, who can do this work? There are no other people to do it. So we decided to do it just to help save our country. So when I focused on just those words, my mind opened back up again, and I really started feeling some confidence in the compassion and love that people can give in the most challenging situations. And so I think if we practice a couple things, we can protect ourselves from falling into this personal distress, which does not help ourselves or certainly anyone else around us. So the first thing is to really protect ourselves from the really negative media. This article was written quite well, I think, but there's a whole lot of negative media out there that really builds on people's fears and really portrays things in a very hopeless and negative way. And so to really protect ourselves from that. And then the second thing is to really take this to the cushion and identify when we start feeling the personal distress. What does that feel like in the body and mind? What does the mind do when we're in that personal distress? Really that feeling of, really hopelessness, I think, is where it gets to me. And, where we lose our object of compassion, focus on our own distress. So to just kind of work with these situations when they come up to bring ourselves up and out of that personal distress. Because when we're in that place, we're not, we can't be helpful to anybody, including ourselves. So.